Some mornings feel heavier than others. Some days the world whispers or shouts expectations at you, and it feels impossible to breathe. This story follows Eli, a young adult carrying the weight of what everyone else thinks he should be. Over the next hours, you will walk with him through pressure, doubt, and the quiet moments where freedom begins to take shape. You will notice the small victories, the silent reflections, the choices that bring inner peace. If you stay with this story until the end, you'll witness how letting go of expectations can feel less like giving up and more like coming home to yourself. So breathe, settle in, and listen. Every moment you spend here is part of the journey toward calm, clarity, and freedom from the weight of expectations. The alarm buzzed softly, almost gentle, yet even this small noise felt like a judgment. Eli lay still, staring at the ceiling. The sunlight fractured across the wall in quiet shards. He thought of the day ahead, emails to answer, classes to attend, career milestones to meet. Already, the world pressed upon him. He rose, each movement deliberate, yet even ritual could not ease the weight. From the kitchen came his mother's voice, gentle but persistent. "Eli, don't forget, your cousin got an internship last summer. Are you keeping up?" He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Not resentment, just the weight of others' expectations, of measuring himself against everyone but his own values. He made breakfast slowly, noticing the details, the grain of bread, the way butter melted. Ordinary, mundane, and yet even in the ordinary, his mind felt chains. The walk to class was quiet, the city moving in its usual rhythm. People passed, each confident, each carrying a version of life that seemed lighter. Eli felt a pull of envy, a whisper of inadequacy. Why can't I feel that ease? He noticed the thought, held it gently, and let it drift away like leaves floating downstream. He breathed in and out, noticing the pulse in his chest, the weight in his shoulders, the small movements of his feet. Even in the throng, he felt the separation between his life and what others expected of him. And for the first time, he realized some things, the judgments, the comparisons, were not his to bear. Some things belonged only to the world, not to him. During lectures, notes blurred beneath his pen. The words on the page were fine, but his mind wandered. He imagined his parents' unspoken hopes, his friends' unacknowledged achievements, the silent tally of society's rankings. The numbers swirled in his head, and then, quietly, he recognized something. This weight was heavy because it was borrowed. It was not his. It was an inheritance of others' desires, opinions, and comparisons. And in that moment, he felt a subtle shift, a flicker of awareness. Perhaps peace could be found in what I can control, perhaps within myself. That night, in the quiet of his room, Eli stared at his reflection. The same eyes, the same face, yet somehow burdened by invisible hands pressing down. He remembered small gestures from the day, the smile he forced, the nods he offered, the careful steps he took so no one would notice his hesitation. And he understood something simple, almost imperceptible. He could not stop the world from weighing expectations upon him,
but he could stop himself from letting them define him. He sat in silence. The night pressed softly against the window pane. He breathed. The weight remained, but in the stillness it seemed lighter. Days blurred. Small choices revealed themselves. A text ignored. A suggestion politely declined. A moment of silence held instead of forced agreement. Each felt insignificant, yet together they began to carve space for Eli's own mind. The realization came gently. The world might demand, might compare, might tally. And yet the mind that accepts and chooses calmly, the mind that breathes and acts according to its own measure, is free. Eli did not think of Stoicism as a lesson or philosophy as a book. He simply noticed, when he acted with intention, with calm, with reason, the burden shifted. It was no longer crushing. It was manageable. The weekend arrived with its usual cadence. Family dinner. His mother fussed over the table, placing dishes with precision. His father glanced at Eli as he arrived. "How are your grades? Did you submit your latest assignment on time?" He answered evenly, mindful of tone. He noticed the rising tension in his chest, the familiar pull to justify, to explain, to please. And then he paused, breathing into the space of silence between questions. He realized he did not need to defend his choices. They were his to make, not his parents' to control. And for the first time, he noticed calm underneath the anxiety. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it was there. After dinner, he stepped outside. The evening air was crisp, carrying faint smells of rain and pavement. The streets were quiet. He walked slowly, noticing the rhythm of his footsteps. Thoughts arrived, pressure from school, career, family. But he did not chase them. Instead, he observed them as a river flowing past, aware but undisturbed. Each step became a meditation, each breath a small assertion of autonomy. He felt something new, a sense of freedom that did not come from changing the world, but from choosing how to move through it. The next morning, a professor praised his work during class. Normally, he would have felt the rush of approval and the consequent anxiety of maintaining it. But this time, he simply acknowledged the words, smiled, and returned to his seat. He realized the value of his work did not hinge on external recognition. He could act rightly, fully, and without attachment to reward. This was a subtle liberation, almost imperceptible, yet profound in its quietness. Eli began noticing tiny patterns. When he spoke honestly, without embellishment, he felt lighter. When he declined obligations that were not truly his mind expanded into a gentle calm. One afternoon, he sat on a bench in the park watching children play. Their laughter was free, untethered, and he understood peace was not the absence of expectation, but the absence of surrender to it. The principle acted itself out. No books, no lessons, just lived experience.
Eli scrolled through social media, as he often did in restless moments. Photos of friends traveling, achieving, smiling with a confidence he did not feel. He noticed the familiar pull, the gnawing thought that he was behind, that he was lacking. He closed the phone slowly. The world's tally would not define him. His pace, his path, his choices, these were his own. The comparison was only a shadow. The substance of life was elsewhere, in deliberate acts, in quiet breaths, in attention to the moment. Late night, a small desk, a single lamp casting warm light, papers spread across the table, tasks lined up in meticulous order. He felt the pressure, the drive to perform, the expectation to excel. And then he paused. The pen hovered over the page. Does my worth lie in these marks? The question came not as panic, but as reflection. He scribbled a single line. I am enough in the moment. A calm settled. The tasks remained, but the weight felt less suffocating. The night air entered the room through the cracked window. Ordinary, yet somehow vast. At a cafe, he met a friend. The friend spoke of achievements, promotions, accolades. Eli nodded, listened, engaged. But the usual tug, need to match, to prove, to justify, was softer now. He realized he could honor the friend's experience without letting it press upon his own. There was room for both. His life was not a ledger, and comparisons were not a requirement. The lesson was not learned in words, but in the ease that followed acknowledgement. The principle acted itself out in his quiet acceptance. A sudden rainstorm drove him under the awning of a shop. People hurried past, drenched, exclaiming at inconvenience. Eli watched, feeling the cold drops on his jacket. The discomfort was real, but his reaction was his own. He smiled slightly. A storm came, but it passed, and he was still walking, still breathing, still moving through the world on his own terms. The realization, peace did not require perfect conditions. It required calm action within the storm. Another dinner. Questions about grades, career plans, and social conduct. His mother's eyes, his father's tone, they pressed gently but persistently. Eli spoke slowly, deliberately. He honored their care, but did not surrender to their control. He chose calm words, honest words, even if they deviated from the expected answer. The air in the room shifted slightly, not dramatically, but enough. A subtle respect for his autonomy emerged, though unspoken. He felt the burden lighten, almost imperceptibly. Alone in his room, Eli looked out the window. Trees swayed in evening light. The wind whispered. He closed his eyes. Thoughts arrived. School, career, parents, friends, but he did not chase them. He noticed them, then released them. A rhythm formed. Attention, breath, calm. For the first time, the ordinary space of his room felt expansive, almost sacred. The principle, the mind could choose what to hold and what to let go. A small error at his part-time job. Usually this would trigger panic, shame, dread of judgment. But Eli noticed the usual thoughts arise and observed them quietly. He corrected the mistake, calmly explained it, and moved on. No internal catastrophe, no frantic overcompensation, just action, reflection, and forward movement. He understood mistakes were inevitable. Anxiety about them was optional. A morning jog through quiet streets, frost on grass, early sunlight turning everything soft gold. Each step measured, each breath deliberate. He realized the mind had begun to carry less weight, not because the world had changed, but because he had. Each step, each decision, each observation was a small liberation. Freedom was not granted. It was practiced, moment by moment. A friend asked casually, "When will you decide on a career path?" The question landed lightly, but it could have carried the old pressure. Eli breathed. He answered honestly, without embellishment, without self-judgment. The room held no drama, only quiet acknowledgement. The principle acted itself out. Autonomy existed not in escape, but in deliberate choice. In the university library, surrounded by the hum of study, Eli watched others buried in texts, measuring knowledge like currency. He felt the old tug of needing to keep up. Instead, he focused on his own work, on understanding, on presence. Achievement became secondary, action became primary. The mind began to taste calm in doing what was necessary, not what was measured. Walking to a small hill outside town, he watched the sunset. Colors spilled across the horizon. He noticed the impermanence, the inevitable flow of day to night. And he realized, just as the sun sets and rises, expectations ebb and flow. They come, they pass. He could meet them, acknowledge them, but not be consumed by them. The lesson acted itself out. Impermanence was freedom. A peer criticized him at a group meeting, expecting defensiveness. Eli noticed the irritation rise. Instead of reacting, he stayed calm, responded factually, and allowed silence to carry what words could not. The criticism passed. No storm arose. He discovered a subtle joy in not surrendering to reaction. The principle was lived, self-control over surrender. Night fell, a candle flickered. He sat cross-legged, closed his eyes. Thoughts of failure, doubt, and pressure arose. He noticed them, allowed them to drift, returning again and again to breath. The mind, once cluttered, began to clear. Calm arose not as absence of difficulty, but as presence of choice. A phone call came from a relative filled with questions about career, grades, life. He answered simply. No over-explanation, no panic. When the call ended, he felt a warmth that he had not before, a quiet sense of mastery over himself. The burden remained, but it no longer crushed. Sitting in a cafe, watching people move, laugh, rush, worry, he noticed something subtle. Everyone carried burdens, often unseen. Some surrendered, some resisted, some adapted. He smiled quietly to himself. He was learning, slowly, through observation and experience, that the burden was universal, yet not absolute. Peace was available to those who practiced it. Weeks passed. Small victories, moments of reflection, choices acted upon with awareness. Eli sat on his bed, looking out the window at rain washing the streets. The storm came, as always, but it passed, and he was still standing, still breathing, still present. He realized letting go of expectations was not a single act. It was a practice, lived each day through choice, attention, and calm. And in that quiet acknowledgement, he felt the first glimmer of inner peace.
Eli awoke before dawn, the sky barely lit, a thin line of orange along the horizon. The alarm clock was silent this morning. He had woken early, as if the day had been calling him through sleep. He lay still, letting the weight of yesterday settle in his mind. It was not the usual suffocating heaviness, but a presence, gentle, patient, like a teacher waiting to be noticed. He inhaled slowly, listening to the faint hum of the city beyond his window, the distant rumble of early buses, the occasional bark of a dog. Even in the quiet, he felt the pull of expectations, assignments to finish, emails to answer, obligations he could not yet name. Rising from bed, his movements were deliberate. He felt the stiffness in his shoulders, the lingering tension in his back, the subtle ache behind his eyes. He stretched slowly, reaching toward the ceiling, noticing the way his body responded to simple motion. Breakfast was simple, a slice of toast, a cup of tea, but even these ordinary acts felt loaded with significance. Every movement could be measured, judged, dissected. But this morning, Eli decided to observe, not judge. The tea poured slowly into his cup, steam curling like soft tendrils of thought. He sipped, and for the first time in days allowed himself a small private pleasure. The walk to university was long, though he usually rushed. Today he moved deliberately, noticing each step. The city streets were damp from the early morning mist, puddles reflecting the pale light of street lamps. People moved around him, each carrying their own burdens, their own expectations. Some smiled, some scowled, some walked quickly as if trying to outrun an invisible force. He felt the old pull to compare, to measure himself against these strangers, their effortless strides, their purposeful movements. But he resisted. He let the thought drift past, acknowledging it without attachment, as one might notice a leaf floating down a stream. In the lecture hall, the familiar hum of conversation filled the space before the professor arrived. He sat quietly, pen in hand, paper blank before him. Normally, this blank space felt oppressive, a canvas for judgment, for self-critique, for comparison. But today, he simply observed the blankness, noticing the fear and tension rising in his chest. He let them exist without rushing to resolve them. Breath by breath, he felt the tightness loosen slightly, like a knot unraveling inch by inch. The professor began speaking, words flowing into the room, yet he noticed them only partially, letting his mind hover on the rhythm of the voice, the sway of gestures, the quiet movement of time. After class, Eli lingered in the library, choosing a corner bathed in soft morning light. Books surrounded him, but he did not reach for them. Instead, he observed, noticing the patterns of students around him, one tapping furiously at a keyboard, another reading with intense focus, a third glancing repeatedly at their phone, anxiety etched into every movement. He recognized the familiar currents, the desire to prove, to excel, to measure worth against some invisible standard. And then he realized, quietly, that none of it belonged to him. The anxiety was external, borrowed from comparison, from expectation, from habit. In that realization, he felt a subtle lift, as though a thin weight had been removed from his chest. Later, in a quiet park on the walk home, Eli lingered beneath a row of trees. The leaves whispered in the breeze, carrying scents of wet earth and distant rain. Children ran past, laughing, their joy uncontained, untethered by rules or measurement. A mother bent to tie a child's shoelace, calm, patient, present. He watched, noticing the ordinary magic of these moments. The world moved forward, carrying expectation and judgment, but here in this park, the simplicity of presence created a kind of quiet sanctuary. At home, family presence weighed more than usual. The kitchen was warm, filled with smells of cooking, clattering dishes, the hum of conversation. Questions, gentle critiques, expectations, all flowed toward him like a river, pressing against fragile banks. Usually, he would feel compelled to respond immediately, to defend, to explain, to justify. But today, he paused. He inhaled. He allowed the moment to unfold without reaction, choosing calm observation over automatic surrender. Words came when necessary, measured, honest, free of embellishment or panic. The room did not transform dramatically, but he sensed a subtle shift. His own perception had changed. The weight was no longer as crushing. The space between stimulus and reaction had widened. That night, Eli sat by his window, looking out at the city lights shimmering in puddles on asphalt streets. He noticed the familiar currents of thought, school assignments, career prospects, family hopes, social comparisons. Yet he did not chase them. Each thought arose, he observed, and released it, like leaves drifting on water. Breath by breath, he felt the mind expand, the chest loosen, the habitual tension dissolve into something lighter, almost imperceptible. For the first time, he felt the quiet, subtle truth that peace was not the absence of external pressure, but the mastery of internal response. In the days that followed, these practices continued, each small victory built upon the last. A text ignored, a social obligation declined, a moment of silence held instead of forced agreement, each became a thread in a slowly woven tapestry of freedom. Eli began to notice how each deliberate action reinforced his autonomy, not by resisting the world, but by choosing calmly how to inhabit it. He began to notice how the mind, when left to its habitual impulses, created storms over things that were not truly his to control. And yet when attention and choice entered, the storm passed, leaving only clear, still water in its place. He began experimenting with deliberate pauses, letting the phone ring, letting criticism pass without reaction, letting expectations arrive and fade without surrender. Each moment became a meditation in itself, a living exercise in autonomy and calm. One afternoon, sitting at a cafe with a friend, he noticed how easily the old patterns crept back, the subtle tug to measure, to justify, to match achievements. But this time, he observed without engaging. He allowed the conversation to flow, answered honestly, but did not attach his self-worth to the interaction. He realized the quiet joy that came from acting authentically, independent of approval. Even small errors began to lose their power over him. A mistake at his part-time job that once might have triggered panic was now met with calm acknowledgement and correction. He discovered that failure was inevitable, but anxiety about it was optional. The principle acted itself out. Freedom arose not from perfection, but from intentional response. Even his body began to mirror the mind's subtle change. He walked with a lighter step, ate with more awareness, slept with less tension in his shoulders. Ordinary moments, once freighted with expectation, became opportunities for practice, moments to notice, breathe, and act with deliberation. The city streets, the lecture halls, the family rooms all became arenas for quiet mastery, lived rather than theorized.
Sunsets took on new meaning. Watching the horizon glow with soft, impermanent light, he understood a subtle truth. Expectations, like the sun, rise and fall, come and go. Their presence did not dictate his inner state. Peace could be practiced, cultivated, and maintained even amidst the ebb and flow of pressure. The morning air carried a chill as Eli stepped outside, the sky pale and quiet. He walked along streets still half asleep, noticing puddles reflecting faint light, the soft hum of distant traffic, and the subtle sway of branches in the wind. Each detail seemed to hold a lesson. Presence is everywhere if attention allows. He felt a deepening of awareness, an understanding that observation alone could begin to untangle the threads of expectation binding him. Classes passed as usual, yet Eli approached them differently. The habitual anxiety that had once gripped his chest now arose, observed, and receded without leaving its familiar mark. He took notes, answered questions, and participated, yet without attachment to outcomes. Each moment became a subtle meditation. The work was done for its own sake, the effort measured not by recognition, but by intentional engagement. In the quiet spaces between tasks, he felt a lightness he had not known before. Walking across campus, he noticed friends bustling by, immersed in plans and social comparison. For the first time, he did not feel the need to mirror them, compete, or justify his own path. The freedom in that recognition was small, almost imperceptible, but it stretched across his chest like a gentle exhalation. He understood that the pressure he had carried for so long had been partly self-inflicted, sustained by habitual surrender to invisible expectations.
Later, at a cafe, he found a corner table bathed in soft afternoon light. He ordered a simple drink and allowed himself to sit quietly, noticing the rhythm of life around him. People came and went, some hurried, some relaxed. He observed how each carried their own hidden burdens, frustration, anticipation, fatigue, without letting them dominate the world outside themselves. He recognized the universality of struggle and the uniqueness of choice. Returning home that evening, he faced the familiar rhythm of family life. Conversations flowed as they always did. Questions about his future, gentle reminders of what he should accomplish, subtle comparisons to relatives and friends. In the past, he might have felt pressure rise, words stumble, and judgment seize him. Now he listened, spoke honestly, and allowed space for silence. He noticed the subtle shift in himself, the absence of internal collapse, the quiet assertion of autonomy. The burden remained present, but it no longer dictated his inner state. That night, he sat on his bed, the city lights flickering softly through the window. He reflected on the week's experiences, small victories, subtle freedoms, moments of calm in spaces that had once felt confining. He noticed how choices made with awareness, pausing before speaking, acting deliberately rather than impulsively, had accumulated into a kind of internal scaffolding. Step by step, he had begun to construct a space where expectation could arrive and leave without stealing his serenity. In the days that followed, he experimented further. He noticed that when he declined invitations or obligations that felt burdensome, he felt no guilt, only a subtle clarity. When criticism arrived, he observed without reacting, choosing whether or not to internalize the words. When plans went awry, he met the disruption calmly, aware that outcomes were not fully within his control. Each practice reinforced an emerging pattern. Peace was cultivated through choice, not avoidance. One morning, walking through a quiet park, he observed a bird perched on a branch, tilting its head as if listening to the world around it. The simplicity of the moment struck him. The bird's existence was unconcerned with expectation or comparison. It acted according to instinct and circumstance, yet moved through life with what seemed like effortless presence. Eli realized he could emulate this, not in perfection, but in practice, through awareness, acceptance, and deliberate action. Back in his room, he reflected on previous patterns of thought, anxiety, self-doubt, the relentless tallying of others' expectations. They had not disappeared, but they no longer dominated him. He noticed them rise, observed them, and released them, creating space for calm. This became a rhythm: awareness, reflection, action, release. Each repetition built resilience, a subtle muscle of the mind capable of sustaining equanimity. Conversations with friends revealed more of this transformation. When peers boasted or compared, he listened, contributed honestly, and refrained from internalizing or measuring himself against their words. The freedom in that choice was quiet but profound. He no longer reacted out of fear or desire to impress, but from intention aligned with his own values. Stoic practice, he realized, was not a theory, but a lived, breathing presence in every decision. Small failures continued to appear: forgotten assignments, missed deadlines, awkward social moments. Yet each misstep became a mirror reflecting the difference between reaction and response. Instead of panic, frustration, or shame, Eli practiced calm acknowledgement, correction, and forward motion. In this, he noticed the principle of impermanence and control at work. Circumstances fluctuate, but the mind's response can remain steady. Even ordinary routines became opportunities for reflection. Morning coffee, evening walks, quiet moments of solitude, all transformed into spaces of practice. Observation, attention, and deliberate choice allowed him to confront expectation without surrendering to it. The city, once oppressive, now felt like a vast stage on which he could exercise agency, witness impermanence, and practice calm. During a late-night walk, rain began to fall softly, washing streets and pavements, creating the familiar scent of wet earth. He noticed people rushing, worried, frustrated. He too felt the cold dampness, yet did not resist it. The storm came, as it always would, yet he could move through it with calm, intact, present. The principle was clear. Freedom arose not from conditions, but from deliberate choice and awareness. By the end of the second half of Part 2, Eli had begun to consolidate these reflections into lived understanding. Awareness had grown into subtle mastery. Choice had become action. Observation had become freedom. The pressure of expectations, though still present, no longer dictated his inner state. He had begun the transition from passive awareness to deliberate, stoic engagement with life. In quiet meditation that night, he sat by the window, listening to the distant hum of the city. Each thought of anxiety, doubt, or expectation arose, and he observed, released, and returned to the steady rhythm of breath. The mind, once a storm of borrowed weight, had begun to calm. The first glimmers of sustained inner freedom appeared, not in dramatic triumphs, but in quiet persistence, repeated practice, and the mindful choice to act in accordance with what was within his control.
Eli awoke before dawn once again, though the sky was now lighter, hinting at the sun's slow arrival. The city hummed faintly, and he felt the quiet expectation of another day. But today it felt different, not oppressive, not demanding, not heavy. Today, the day was an opportunity to act with awareness, to practice what he had glimpsed in reflection. He rose, stretching slowly, feeling each muscle, each tendon awaken. The familiar tightness in his shoulders remained, but it was no longer a weight to bear. It was a reminder of his presence in the world, of the body that carried his mind. Breakfast was simple, yet deliberate. He poured milk into cereal with intention, noticing the sound, the texture, the subtle swirl as it mixed. He tasted each bite, not out of hunger alone, but as a conscious act of being. Even this ordinary ritual became a practice, engagement with the present moment, a step toward autonomy, a recognition that ordinary life could hold extraordinary lessons. At university, tasks arrived as they always did: assignments, deadlines, messages. Normally, these would press upon him, triggering anxiety and a sense of urgency that weighed heavily. Today, he approached them differently. He paused before opening his laptop, inhaled, and reminded himself that only some things were within his control. Effort, attention, honesty, these were his. Grades, recognition, others' judgment, these were not. With this frame, he began his work calmly, deliberately, step by step, without haste, without fear. The first challenge came quickly, a group project with peers who were anxious, competitive, and prone to subtle criticism. In the past, Eli might have reacted defensively, sought approval, or attempted to assert dominance to prove worth. Instead, he listened, observed, and acted with intention. He contributed his ideas clearly and succinctly, neither overshadowing others nor allowing their tension to dictate his state. When conflict arose, he did not react emotionally, but paused, assessed,
and responded calmly. His peers noticed his steadiness, though none could fully articulate why it seemed effortless. After the project, Eli walked through the campus gardens. Sunlight filtered through early blossoms, casting delicate patterns on the paths. He noticed the calm that had grown within him. This was no longer just awareness, it was applied practice. Reflection alone had taught him much, but action was now transforming understanding into habit. He could face the world and remain measured, even amidst the currents of expectation. At home, challenges persisted. His mother asked about career prospects, gently prodding him to consider future plans, subtly comparing him to relatives. In the past, his chest would tighten, words would falter, and he would feel compelled to justify or over-explain. Now he responded simply, honestly, without apology. He said, "I'm exploring options. I'm focused on what I can control now." The words, calm and measured, seemed to settle the air in the room. Not that expectations vanished, but they no longer commanded his inner state. Small daily decisions became deliberate tests of autonomy. Should he attend a social event he didn't wish to? Declined politely, without guilt. Could he complete a task without obsessing over perfection? Completed it steadily, noting that perfection was not required, and that his value did not hinge on flawless execution. Action, reflection, and calm were sufficient. In this, he practiced the Stoic principle that events themselves are neutral. It is only our judgment that colors them with pain or relief. Even ordinary routines became arenas for applied practice. Morning coffee, evening walks, simple chores, all transformed into conscious exercises in awareness and autonomy. The mind, once pulled in all directions by expectation, now began to experience the subtle liberation of deliberate attention. The familiar streets, once oppressive in their demands, now became a stage for quiet mastery. During a late evening stroll, Eli observed a lone bird perched on a lamppost, tilting its head as it listened to the city. The simplicity of the creature's presence struck him. The bird acted in accordance with its nature, responding to circumstance without burden from expectation. Eli realized that he too could live similarly, not in perfection, but in deliberate practice, in measured presence, in mindful response to what is within his control. Weeks passed, each filled with small victories and subtle tests. Schoolwork completed calmly, social interactions navigated with awareness, family pressures met with measured honesty. The mind, once turbulent with anxiety and comparison, began to experience extended stretches of calm. The body, responding to the mind, moved with steadiness, ate with attention, rested with ease. Ordinary life became the proving ground, the place where Stoic principles acted themselves out through repeated experience.
Even minor setbacks became opportunities for application. A lost package, a miscommunication with a peer, an unexpected change in schedule, each arose and passed without disturbing his equanimity. He recognized the impermanence of circumstance, the neutrality of events, and the power of deliberate choice. The world pressed, as it always had, but he no longer carried the weight of expectation unconsciously. Each day became a sequence of intentional acts, a rhythm of presence, observation, choice, and calm. The next morning, Eli awoke with a faint sense of anticipation. Not excitement, not anxiety, but a quiet readiness. The challenges ahead were unknown, deadlines, interactions, responsibilities, but the weight of expectation no longer loomed like an invisible oppressor. Instead, it arrived as a field of opportunity, a space in which his choices and attention could shape experience. He rose slowly, stretching, noticing the subtle tension in his muscles and the clarity in his mind. Breakfast was simple, a quiet ritual, and he ate with deliberate attention, tasting each bite fully, without rush. At the university, his first challenge arose immediately. A professor, known for exacting standards, questioned his approach during a seminar. In the past, Eli would have felt the familiar tension, the pull to justify, the anxiety that constricted thought. Now he paused, breathed, and responded calmly. He explained his reasoning succinctly, acknowledging the professor's points without defensiveness. The moment passed smoothly. There was no inner collapse, no lingering panic. He noticed the subtle power in choice, the ability to act deliberately rather than react impulsively, even when pressure was high. Later, a group discussion grew heated. Peers argued over conflicting ideas, their voices rising, impatience spilling into sarcasm. Eli felt the old tug to respond, to defend, to assert dominance. He recognized it immediately and chose differently. He listened fully, then spoke with clarity and calm. His words were measured, his tone steady, his focus on the issue rather than ego. By the end, the discussion had resolved with compromise, and Eli felt the profound satisfaction that comes not from winning, but from acting with integrity and calm. After class, he wandered the campus path slowly. Trees swayed in the afternoon breeze, their leaves brushing softly against one another. The sunlight filtered through the branches painted the ground in shifting mosaics. He noticed the patterns, the light, the subtle movements of life around him. Each observation reinforced his inner calm, a reminder that the world is vast, yet he can navigate it without being consumed by it. Small moments of mindfulness repeated over days and weeks had become a reservoir of serenity from which he could draw when challenged. At home, family dynamics tested him further. His father, concerned about long-term stability, asked pointed questions about career paths, social circles, and financial planning. Eli felt the instinctual pull to justify, explain, or defend. He inhaled, feeling the tension rise, then let it pass. He spoke with honesty, calmly, and without attachment to the response. "I'm focusing on what I can control now. I'll consider next steps carefully, but today I act within my means." There was no confrontation, no anxiety, only presence, choice, and measured response. The burden of expectation had not vanished, but it no longer controlled him. Work brought its own tests. A small error, unnoticed by others, could have triggered the old spiral of self-criticism. Instead, he noticed the error, corrected it efficiently, and moved on. Later, a coworker criticized his approach to a task. His first impulse was irritation, but he paused. He acknowledged the feedback, reflected quietly, and applied the insight where appropriate. Each challenge became a practice in deliberate response, a living laboratory for Stoic principles. Even the weather played a subtle role. A sudden rainstorm drenched him on the walk home. He could have rushed, lamented, or complained. Instead, he walked steadily, feeling the cold drops, listening to the rhythmic patter on the pavement, noticing the scent of wet earth. The storm, like expectation or pressure, came and went. His choice, however, remained, to remain calm, present, and undisturbed by circumstance. Social gatherings tested him too. Invitations arrived, some desirable, some obligatory, some burdensome. He declined some without guilt, attended others with attention and presence, and navigated conflicts without surrendering his inner state. Friends noticed a subtle change. Eli no longer reacted out of fear, need for approval, or comparison. Instead, he engaged authentically, calmly, and thoughtfully. The practice of autonomy, once theoretical, now manifested consistently in action. Unexpected challenges arose as well. A roommate forgot to pay a shared bill, creating tension and potential conflict. In the past, Eli might have felt frustration or irritation, internalizing blame and anxiety. Now he assessed the situation calmly, communicated clearly, and resolved the matter efficiently. He recognized the principle: circumstances themselves are neutral. Judgment determines the emotional impact. By choosing measured response, he avoided unnecessary distress. Even ordinary tasks were transformed into practice. Morning coffee, evening walks, simple chores, all became opportunities to exercise awareness, attention, and calm. Each repetition strengthened his ability to navigate pressure without surrendering. Each small victory reinforced a subtle but growing sense of self-mastery. Family interactions remained ongoing tests. A cousin visited, bringing subtle comparisons and veiled critiques. Eli felt the old stirrings of irritation and self-consciousness. He paused, allowed the sensations to arise, then released them without judgment. He responded with honesty, warmth, and presence. His cousin's comments, once heavy, now passed like clouds, without disturbing the underlying calm. At work, a manager imposed last-minute changes on a project, creating potential stress and confusion. In prior months, Eli would have panicked, stayed up late, and carried the anxiety into sleep. This time, he acknowledged the pressure, made a plan, and executed it deliberately, maintaining inner calm throughout. The project succeeded, not because the task was simple, but because he had practiced calm under pressure repeatedly, turning experience into habit. Even moments of personal doubt became exercises in applied reflection. Self-critical thoughts about competence, appearance, or success arose. He observed them, questioned their validity, and released them. He noted, internal judgment is optional, and freedom comes from choosing which thoughts to engage with and which to let pass. Each release reinforced a subtle autonomy, a steadying of the mind's habitual turbulence. One evening, walking through a quiet park, he noticed a young boy struggling to climb a tree. The child's frustration mirrored his own past struggles with expectation and failure. Eli watched silently, offering encouragement only when necessary, allowing the child to learn through effort. The scene mirrored his own learning. Growth occurs through deliberate, mindful action, not through judgment or fear. Mistakes continued to appear, minor and sometimes disorienting. Missed deadlines, social missteps, or forgotten obligations. Each became an opportunity to practice applied stoicism. Pause, observe, act deliberately, release attachment to outcome. The practice of freedom through conscious choice was no longer theoretical. It had become a steady rhythm, guiding him through the complexity of daily life. Late nights brought reflection. He sat by his window, looking at city lights reflecting in puddles. He reviewed the day's events, challenges met, choices made deliberately, emotions observed and released. A quiet satisfaction arose, subtle yet profound. The mind, once stormy with anxiety and comparison, now carried stretches of calm, resilience, and freedom. Each day reinforced the principle that inner peace is cultivated, practiced, and applied, not given or found externally.
Eli awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through his window, the city beneath him stirring quietly. For a long moment he lay still, listening to the rhythm of life outside and inside himself. The awareness that had been slowly growing over weeks had deepened. The weight of expectation no longer dominated him, but arrived and departed like clouds in a vast sky. He rose, stretching deliberately, feeling his muscles and joints respond. The body was no longer just a vessel to bear stress, it was an instrument of conscious action, a companion in the practice of presence. Breakfast was calm and intentional. He moved slowly, noting the sound of milk pouring into a cup, the subtle aroma of tea leaves steeping, the warmth of each bite on his tongue. Each ordinary act had become a meditation, an applied practice of attention and choice. Even in simplicity, there was depth. Ordinary life, once oppressive, had become a field for practice and growth. At university, Eli faced challenges as usual, yet approached them with quiet steadiness. A difficult seminar, full of fast-talking peers and complex questions, would have once thrown him into internal chaos. Now, he observed carefully, listened fully, and responded with clarity and calm. He noticed when old patterns of comparison or self-doubt tried to surface, acknowledged them, and let them pass. Each instance was a rehearsal in autonomy, a small exercise in the art of deliberate response. During a group assignment, tensions flared. Students clashed over differing ideas, voices rose, and impatience edged into frustration. Eli remained composed, speaking succinctly, listening patiently, and allowing others space to express themselves. Conflicts resolved not by dominance or appeasement, but by presence, measured reasoning, and calm engagement. By the end of the day, he recognized the subtle power of acting without attachment to approval or recognition. The world might challenge him, yet he could remain undisturbed internally. Walking across campus later, Eli noticed ordinary details with a depth he had rarely allowed before. Sunlight glinting off puddles, the sway of leaves in the wind, the rhythmic footsteps of fellow students. Each moment offered an opportunity to practice awareness, to reinforce the rhythm of calm and choice. Life, in its simplest form, had become an arena for subtle mastery. Family life continued to present tests. Conversations about future plans, finances, or expectations arrived frequently, as they always had. Eli noticed his old reactions: tight chest, racing thoughts, impulse to justify or explain. Now he paused. Breath by breath, he allowed the feelings to arise, observed them without judgment, and responded with honesty and presence. I'm focusing on what I can act on today. I'll plan for tomorrow when tomorrow arrives. The words carried no defensiveness, no fear. They were statements of internal sovereignty. And he noticed the shift in the room. The pressure remained, but it no longer controlled him. Work introduced new challenges, testing patience and skill. Tasks arrived late, instructions were unclear, and collaboration required delicate navigation. In the past, such situations would have created hours of internal stress, restless nights, and self-recrimination. This time, he paused, assessed, and acted deliberately. Mistakes were corrected calmly. Miscommunications were resolved efficiently. He noted that while events were unpredictable, his response remained deliberate, measured, and undisturbed. Each success reinforced the growing certainty. Freedom arose not from control of circumstance, but from mastery of response. Even social interactions became subtle exercises in sustained calm. Invitations to gatherings, both welcome and obligatory, were considered carefully. He attended some, declined others, and navigated disagreements without internal collapse. When peers compared, criticized, or sought validation through subtle dominance, he listened, reflected, and responded authentically, yet without attachment. Each encounter became an opportunity to practice autonomy and equanimity. Each interaction a chance to embody lived Stoic principles. Rain came unexpectedly one afternoon, drenching streets and sidewalks. Where once he would have rushed, frustrated, or resisted, he now walked calmly through the storm, noting the rhythm of drops, the scent of wet earth, the coolness on his skin. The storm arrived, passed, and left traces in the environment, but his internal state remained calm, steady, and present. Impermanence had been absorbed, internalized, and applied. Life itself became a meditation in motion. Weeks turned into months, each day reinforcing deliberate practice. Morning coffee, evening walks, classroom discussions, family conversations, social events, minor work challenges. Each moment became a field in which attention, reflection, and choice strengthened his internal stability. Mistakes continued to occur, misplaced assignments, forgotten errands, unexpected disruptions, but each became an opportunity to observe, act deliberately, and release attachment to outcome. In these repeated cycles, mastery grew subtly, almost imperceptibly, yet undeniably. Eli's internal dialogue had transformed. Self-critical thoughts, once habitual and oppressive, arose less frequently and were met with awareness, acknowledgement, and release. He noticed the natural tendency to compare, measure, and worry, yet no longer surrendered to it. Inner freedom was not perfection, it was sustained presence, intentional choice, and calm action amid the ebb and flow of external pressure. Family and friends began noticing changes as well. Conversations that once triggered tension now flowed with ease. Eli no longer reacted from fear, insecurity, or desire for approval. Instead, he engaged with authenticity, calm, and measured presence. The freedom he carried was subtle, quiet, yet deeply felt, visible not in grand gestures, but in steady, consistent behavior. Unexpected challenges arose as well. A major group project threatened to derail deadlines. A peer's sudden illness required reallocation of tasks, and a miscommunication created temporary tension among collaborators. In past months, Eli would have panicked, overcorrected, or internalized blame. This time, he paused, assessed, and acted deliberately. He delegated when necessary, communicated clearly, and maintained calm. The outcome was not perfect, but it was navigated with presence, efficiency, and measured response. Each challenge reinforced the principle: internal state is independent of external circumstance when guided by deliberate attention. Even ordinary routines became spaces of mastery. Preparing meals, cleaning, exercising, walking, journaling. Each activity was an opportunity to observe, choose, and act deliberately. Repetition, consistency, and attention had woven calm into daily life, producing a subtle, persistent freedom. Impermanence, pressure, expectation, all arrived, passed, and were met with equanimity. Eli noticed the difference between mere reflection and living principle. Reflection revealed understanding. Action reinforced mastery.
The quiet victories of applied Stoicism, handling criticism calmly, navigating social tension without collapse, responding deliberately to unforeseen circumstances, formed the foundation for sustained inner peace. Life itself became the teacher, and he the practitioner. Even nights offered opportunities for awareness. Sitting by the window, watching distant city lights shimmer in puddles, Eli reviewed each day. Mistakes, successes, challenges, ordinary moments. They were all canvases for practice. He observed, acknowledged, released, and integrated. The rhythm of applied presence had become habitual, subtle yet unmistakable. He had begun living Stoic principles not as philosophy, but as tangible, daily reality. The sun had barely risen when Eli awoke, the city quiet beneath the soft light of dawn. He lay in bed, listening to the distant hum of life, to the rhythm of his own breath, and to the subtle stirrings of thought. Weeks of reflection and deliberate practice had brought him to this moment, the possibility of sustained calm, of living with awareness and intentionality even amid the unpredictable pressures of life. He rose slowly, stretching his limbs with deliberate attention, feeling each muscle awaken, each tendon respond. His body was no longer merely a vessel, it was an instrument of mindful action, aligned with the deliberate, steady mind he had cultivated. Breakfast was simple, prepared with care. The act of pouring tea, slicing bread, and savoring each bite became a meditation. Ordinary routines were no longer mundane, They were exercises in presence, practice, and subtle mastery. Each sip, each movement, each breath reinforced the growing thread of calm that ran through his days. At the university, Eli faced a test of his composure. A professor questioned his understanding of a complex topic in front of peers. In earlier months, panic would have surged, the chest tightening, the mind racing with self-doubt. Now he paused, observed the sensation, and responded deliberately. He explained his perspective calmly, acknowledged alternate viewpoints without defensiveness, and completed the exchange with clarity. The moment passed, and the usual weight of judgment that had accompanied it never arose. He noticed the quiet power of applied choice, the ability to remain undisturbed by external pressure. Later, a peer confronted him over a perceived slight in a collaborative project. Voices rose, frustration appeared, and habitual anxiety nudged the surface. Eli felt the familiar pull to justify, defend, or assert. He paused, took a deep breath, and chose differently. He listened fully, acknowledged the concern, and responded with honesty, focusing on the facts rather than emotions. The confrontation resolved, not through dominance, avoidance, or ego, but through presence, clarity, and calm. The lesson was subtle, yet profound. Real strength lay in measured response, not reaction. Walking across campus, Eli noticed ordinary details with heightened awareness. The sway of trees in the wind, the soft glimmer of sunlight through leaves, the rhythmic pattern of footsteps passing on the path. Each small observation became a meditation, reinforcing attention and presence. Life, in its ordinary details, had become a continuous field of practice, a canvas for applied Stoicism. At home, family challenges emerged in ways both expected and subtle. Questions about career direction, financial planning, and long-term goals arrived persistently. Once, these would have triggered panic, self-criticism, or defensive explanations. This time, he inhaled, acknowledged the feelings, and responded honestly, calmly, and without attachment. "I am doing what I can today. The future will unfold as it must." Words of intention replaced words of anxiety. The burden remained, but it no longer dominated his inner state. Work presented trials of another kind. A last-minute shift in responsibilities, coupled with unclear instructions from a manager, could have produced hours of stress. Instead, Eli paused, assessed, and acted deliberately. He delegated tasks thoughtfully, clarified instructions, and approached the workload calmly. Mistakes, when they occurred, were corrected without panic. Each challenge reinforced the principle. Circumstances themselves were neutral. Freedom and calm arose from measured, intentional response. Social situations tested him further. Invitations, gatherings, and minor conflicts required careful navigation. Where he might have previously sought approval, reacted defensively, or compared himself to peers, he now engaged authentically, calmly, and without surrendering inner peace. Friends noticed the subtle transformation, though few could articulate its source. The freedom Eli carried was quiet, persistent, and increasingly visible in the rhythm of his actions. One evening, unexpected news arrived. A family member was facing health issues. Concern arose naturally, but panic did not. Eli acknowledged the situation fully, considered what was within his control, and acted where possible, supporting, communicating, and assisting without overextending into worry about outcomes beyond his influence. The principle was clear. Action, guided by choice, not reaction to fear, preserves calm and effectiveness. Even mundane routines became arenas for continued practice. Cooking, cleaning, walking, journaling, each became an exercise in presence, attention, and deliberate action. Repetition of mindful engagement over weeks and months had transformed ordinary life into a living laboratory of autonomy and serenity. Mistakes continued, plans changed unexpectedly, and stress appeared. But each instance was met with deliberate choice, observation, and calm. Night walks offered reflection and consolidation. Streets glistened with rain. Distant lights shimmered, and the hum of the city reminded him of impermanence. Thoughts of worry or self-criticism arose, but were observed, acknowledged, and released. Breath by breath, step by step, he embodied the principle that calm is cultivated, practiced, and applied, not found externally, but developed internally. During these weeks, he noticed that even in moments of tension, freedom persisted. A peer's subtle criticism, a family disagreement, an unexpected error at work, each became a testing ground for Stoic practice. By pausing, observing, and acting deliberately, Eli maintained equanimity. Each instance reinforced his autonomy, strengthened his resilience, and deepened his sense of inner freedom. Reflection merged with action seamlessly. Meditation, journaling, quiet observation, these were not separate from life, but integrated into it. Each day, ordinary events became exercises in patience, presence, and mindful response. He recognized the impermanence of all pressures, the neutrality of events, and the power of deliberate choice. Calm, once fragile, had become habitual, sustained, and subtle yet undeniable. One afternoon, walking in the park, he observed children playing, laughing and falling, yet rising again. Their joy was unburdened by expectation, comparison, or judgment. A mother helped her child tie shoelaces, patient and fully present. A bird perched nearby, tilting its head, observing the world with effortless attention. Eli reflected quietly. Growth, presence, and freedom arise not from avoiding difficulty, but from deliberate action, awareness, and calm acceptance. The city around him, once oppressive, now felt like a stage for deliberate, conscious life. Streets, buildings, classrooms, family rooms, and workplaces became arenas for testing and applying awareness. Small victories accumulated, deliberate choice over reaction, observation over judgment, action over panic. Life itself had become a Stoic practice, not theory or abstraction, but living experience. Weeks passed. Minor setbacks appeared as always. Missed deadlines, miscommunications, disrupted plans. But each was met with calm, deliberate attention. Mistakes no longer dictated mood or self-worth. Unexpected events became opportunities for practice rather than crises. Eli recognized the subtle but profound truth. Freedom is cultivated moment by moment, choice by choice, breath by breath. Family and friends observed the transformation. Interactions that once caused tension now flowed with calm authenticity. Criticism no longer disturbed him. Praise no longer defined him. The freedom he carried was subtle, persistent, and deeply felt, visible not in dramatic gestures, but in steady, consistent presence. Eli's life had become a continuous meditation, a series of applied choices, a rhythm of deliberate action. Each day reinforced principles: control of judgment, acceptance of impermanence, conscious action, and mindful response. Stress remained, pressure arrived, and challenges continued, but his inner state remained grounded, free, and serene.
As Eli stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer and fade into night, he realized that peace is not a destination, it is a choice, made moment by moment, breath by breath. And just as he had practiced awareness, presence, and deliberate action in every small moment of his life, you too can carry these lessons forward in your own journey. If this story has offered a moment of reflection, a spark of calm, or a new perspective, take a moment now to subscribe and ensure you never miss another journey like Eli's. Like and comment to share what resonated most with you. Your thoughts and reflections are part of the shared experience of growth. And when you're ready, listen to another story, another guided path, where calm, insight, and quiet wisdom await. waiting for you to step fully into the practice of life. Your next story is just a click away. Step into it and let the journey continue.